Hi, everyone. It's good to see everyone. Oh, should we get started? We've got Scott Carpenter here today. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our talk on French Like Moi, a Midwesterner in Paris. We have author Scott Carpenter. Today is going to be in English. We're really pleased that all of you are here today, and we really thank you for joining us. I'm Renée Saito, director of the library, and Scott Carpenter teaches literature and creative writing at Carleton College in Minnesota. He has, numerous awards: the Mark Twain House Royal Non-Such Prize, Minnesota State Arts Board Grant, et cetera, et cetera. He's, very accomplished. And I wanted to read like a little excerpt that says, from Publishers Weekly, that says, Carpenter has a knack for turning potential catastrophes into comedy. And I think that's a good way to look at this book, is it's, taken with a really good sense of humor and kind of a twist from the, the serious take on Paris. So just to summarize the book, when Scott moves from Minnesota to Paris, little does he suspect the dramas that await: scheming neighbors, police denunciations, surly demonstrators, medical mishaps, and all of those lectures about cheese. So I sort of have an affinity, like a connection here with Scott, because his parents made him speak French, as did my father, who was French. And I'm so thankful for that, as I'm sure Scott is as well. So we'll start off, but first a few instructions on using Zoom for this meeting. Please put your microphone on mute. Keep it silent until you're invited otherwise. Please communicate with us via the chat line. And where is that? Right in the middle, it says Scott, chat at the middle of your screen at the bottom with some symbols. Octavio, if he hasn't done so, will write bonjour, and you'll be able to post your questions and we will share them. So Scott's going to start out with a little excerpt from the beginning of his book, which is a pretty funny way to start out. So thanks, Scott. It's up to you, on to you.
Hey, great. Thanks so much, Renee.
Mm-hmm.
Just a general greeting to everybody. Really delighted to be here, there, wherever it is that we are when we're doing Zoom. Really wish that I could be there in person, but it's great to have this opportunity. And as Renee said, the book really does, I suppose, focus on an unfortunate series of events, one catastrophe after another. And that's also how the book opens in the opening chapter. So I'll just read a couple of pages to give you a sense of what it's like. And then we can move on to other things. The first chapter is called Murders in the Rue Bobio. To be honest, Madame C replied in French, the problem is the neighbors. They refuse to die. The comment set my tea gurgling down the wrong pipe. While I hacked and wheezed, our hostess pinched her brow with concern. Her sandy-haired partner, Patricia, tendered a napkin in case my insides came out. Ça va, Monsieur Carpenter? Ça va, I croaked, flapping my hand to keep her at bay. Repeating it seemed a good idea. Ça va. Anne, who'd been off inspecting the kitchen, returned to the living room for the chore of pounding her husband on the back. Madame C watched from the sofa, and Patricia added cubes of sugar to their tea. The mood was far from homicidal. This kind of situation occurred with distressing frequency in Paris. I'd start a conversation on one topic only to find it veering into another. While I squinted at the butcher's explanation about cutlets, the road would somehow fork off to plumbing. At the post office, I'd be learning about airmail options, only to feel the clerk had hairpinned the subject of Etruscan pottery. Swerves like this generally meant I'd misunderstood some crucial word, had careened off the conversational cliff, and had gone airborne for an undetermined amount of time. So when Madame C mentioned murder as the reason for selling her apartment, I recognized the floating sensation and braced for impact. Where, I wondered during the fall, had I gone wrong? After all, the verb mourir had definitely whizzed by, calling to mind the deathiness of mortgages and mortuaries, and I was pretty sure she'd said something about neighbors. And of course, there'd been a slew of other words too, some of them possibly significant. It was always hard to tell which parts of a foreign language are the engines and axles and which are the hood ornaments and air fresheners. Sometimes, if you play along, you can avoid a crash landing. So why do you suppose that is, I said. I mean, why is it the neighbors won't? And here I made a rolling gesture with my hand, inviting Madame C to fill in the gap with a clarifying comment. She shrugged. It was inexplicable. Monsieur and Madame Potard were old and infirm, but they simply refused. You mean they refused to... My hand swirled. They refused to partir, she said, that is, to leave. Like to an old folks' home? No, her look went steely. To the grave. And so it began.
Well, thank you very much for that reading. It kind of gives us an insight on, I think perhaps France, also perhaps city life in general, but just the frankness with which you spoke is kind of very interesting. So let's start with the title, French Like Moi, a Midwesterner in Paris. Why focus on Midwesterner and Paris? Why not American in France? And is that choice important? Like, what is a Midwesterner? What do you bring as a Midwesterner to the table? So
yeah, wow, lots of questions kind of tucked into one there, right?
Yeah.
And the notion of the Midwesterner is a devilishly difficult word to define, right? I think it is defined differently by different people, and there's no true dictionary definition of what a Midwesterner is. But there is a pretty general understanding of what a Parisian is. And I think that is part of the contrast, right? So the people already have all sorts of ideas about Paris. They think of Paris as being, I don't know, the city of beauty and luxury and cosmopolitanism and high culture and high fashion and good food, all of those things. And when people think about the Midwest, I generally don't have any thoughts at all. All right, it's this notion of flyover country, and the Midwesterners are supposed to be sort of plain spoken and maybe a little slow, or all sorts of bizarre little stereotypes, but that are in a sense the polar opposite of Paris. So that's part of the fun for me in this book, is to take these two places, these two mindsets, these two cultures, and throw them together and see what kind of sparks will fly. I sort of compare it to this project that we did in elementary school when we made a plaster of Paris volcano and then packed it full of baking soda and then doused it with vinegar, and a mess ensued.
Yeah, thank you for that. I can I have my own little adventure in Paris, so I can certainly relate. I decided I was going to parachute in my mid-20s, so a lot of this is resonating. And it's a very funny book. Most books about Paris are not, and I'm glad that you did choose humor. And did you want to speak a little bit on why you chose that route?
Yeah, boy. So part of it is just like a natural take on things, right? That I think that when I'm dealing with difficulty, I have two options. One is to go into the full-blown mode of tragedy, and the other is to try to make light of it. I think that Paris, the way that people usually talk about Paris, it tends to be a little puffed up. That it tends to take itself a little seriously, maybe a little too seriously. So I didn't want to work in that vein. I wanted to kind of push against it a little bit. I think the genesis of the whole project goes back several years when I was with a group of Americans. I've been hired to sort of accompany a group. I wasn't the guide. I was just there to sort of like have conversations and ease things a little bit. And we were in the southwest of France, an area that I know quite well. And the whole trip had been put together ahead of time. It was one of these tour operator operations. And every day we'd be like climbing onto this bus, and the tour guide knew exactly what we'd be doing ahead of time. She'd be whispering to the bus driver, where to stop for the best photo opportunity and we'd show up at a castle, and she'd make sure that people went up the right tower of the castle and turned to the west to get the best view. We had some sort of a presentation of folkloric dance, kind of dance that nobody does anymore except for American tourists. And I guess it was the last full day of the trip, we stopped at a farm to learn about making of foie gras, which, as you probably know, is not like the prettiest operation. And you take a goose and you stick a funnel in its beak, and then you shove grain down its gullet. And I had this kind of epiphany. I thought, oh my God, that's what they've been doing to us for the past 2 weeks. They put this kind of funnel into our brain, and they were shoveling in all these stereotypes and cliches. And then that very same day, we returned to the hotel and got off the bus. People were going upstairs to put away their postcards and their goose paraphernalia. And all of a sudden, these cries broke out in the hallways of the hotel, people running back and forth. And it turned out that while we were out, the place had been burgled, and the wall safes in the rooms had been ripped out of the walls. And most of the people on the trip had lost, wallets, money, jewelry, passports. And it was just total bedlam. The hotel owner was like wringing his hands, and the gendarme came in, like piled out of their little cars. And the whole time I thought, man, I love this. It was the first eruption of reality in the entire trip. And so it was at that point that I realized that, in a sense, catastrophes could be kind of fun in some bizarre way, and that it was also possible to kind of puncture the armor of cliche and stereotype that is, both the great attraction, but also the great lie of the way that France is presented. And then I wondered whether it'd be possible to do it with the sort of hardest case, which is Paris, the city that everybody knows before they go there. So that was the beginning of it. And then the idea that maybe there could be a fun way of dismantling this.
So this sort of leads into my my next question. Because I can kind of relate, having spoken with, friends and family members, some of whom were debating, should I go work in Paris or not? And this, is in France because it's the big city, and I'm not, some went, some didn't, of course, now it's different. Now I know even more people than I did growing up going there. But the whole point was, there was a whole conversation about, is Paris, like the rest of France? Is Paris France, or is it something different?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Paris is very, very different from the provinces. I mean, part of this is determined by just the structure of the country, right? It's a very centralized country. We have Louis XIV, right, to thank for this. All of the roads converge on Paris. All of the rail lines converge on Paris. There's this sense in which Paris is the hub for all of these spokes that go out, and which is different from kind of a federated system like the US. I mean, people could say, well, maybe the capital is Washington, maybe the capital is New York, maybe the capital is Los Angeles, but maybe the capital is Chicago, right? But nobody has any doubt in France. There's no discussion about it. It's very, very concentrated. And there's a certain amount of, I don't know, a little bit of a rivalry, or maybe sometimes a little bit of an inferiority complex in the provinces, that they're not Paris, or that Paris gets all the special treatment. And conversely, Parisians, like, obviously there are many exceptions, but by and large, Parisians say they love the provinces. They're wonderful places to spend a vacation, right? This is the ultimate put down. So there is a sense in which the provinces are actually a little bit more like Midwestern in a sense. And to the extent that there's this tension between Paris and the provinces that maybe reproduces a little bit the kind of tension that I want to introduce between Paris and the Midwest.
Yeah, so your typical region will, part of it will be big city, the big city part of it, and part of it will, of course, be their heritage, just like anywhere else. But it's just kind of interesting because sometimes people think going there, they'll have like the full experience, and it's not necessarily the case, just like in the United States,
Right, yeah. And I would say the provinces in Paris still retain a lot of like local flavor, local color, maybe even more than we often find in the US, just because there are still local languages spoken in some of the provinces. So you find even schools that are where the language of instruction is Basque or Alsatian or Breton, things like that. So the identities that people cling to in the provinces are still really quite strong. So it's not even just a question of Paris versus the provinces, but like different provinces with very different kinds of characters.
Yeah, I just find that all, very fascinating, because each has its own texture and its own flavor.
Right.
And so kind of related is, I like this memoir. I love the book. I think it's a lot of fun. And it's very character driven. There's a lot of sort of idiosyncratic people. And I know sometimes when you go to a foreign country, you kind of sort of typecast people because, they're sort of all sort of similar in a way, but some of them are, not familiar to you in your own country. And what is going on, with that person? We're not quite sure in a new country. Can you describe a couple of your characters and how they might be like quintessentially French?
Yeah, right. So that's a great question. I think that there is this sense of wanting to see in people the manifestation of the broad culture that they represent, which is perfectly true, right? I mean, that's a legitimate thing that people are, they've gone through the same sort of educational system. They've had similar sorts of experiences growing up. So there is a kind of a national character or maybe a regional character that comes across. But then, of course, there's the individual person who is able to put his or her stamp on the personality. And for me, that was part of the, I don't know, like the trick in these books. I'm delighted to hear that you found the book to be character driven. I think the characters are really what make a place. But to try to show the way in which people are both an expression of their broader culture, but also an expression of themselves. So I can give an example of that so maybe I'll start with a brief reading that introduces one of these characters. Then we can talk just a little bit about how that works. This one has to do with an encounter. So not all the characters are necessarily close friends, right? Sometimes it's just people that you bump into in the street. This has to do with an encounter at a cheese shop. And it's from the chapter called Squirrel Pie and the Golden Derriere. At the cheese shop the other day, a woman with a strong chin and dark curls labored over my order. First, she cut a strip of potent comté with a double-handled scimitar, better suited to removing a king's head. Next came the crumbly roquefort, which she sliced with a wire garrote. All her tools seemed designed for more sinister purposes. When she turned and asked me what else I'd like, I reviewed the landscape of wheels and pyramids. My gaze fell upon something new, a stippled little hockey puck of beige. Qu'est-ce que c'est? I asked. When her eyes lit up, I realized my blunder. Alas, too late. Well, she said, sucking in a breath, for starters, it's cow's milk. That was the last thing I fully understood before the hail of information. It was a pressed cheese, she explained, rather than a cooked one, produced deep in the Alps, beyond Grenoble, near the Chartreuse Monastery, where the liqueur used to be distilled. She took another gulp of air and plunged back in, telling me how much fat the cheese had, in what conditions it had been aged, how the molds formed on the crust, which way the mountainside faced, how much the cows ate for breakfast, and what their names were. I'll take one, I said, hoping to close the breach before the tide of details reached my chin. In France, she went on, her dimples deepening with excitement, we eat it with a bit of jam. And then she was suggesting flavors, launching into the technology of fruit preservation. Okay, I said, 2. In France, she harped, you can make a whole meal out of it. It was time for the ejection button. I patted my pocket in mock surprise and pulled out my phone, pressing it to my ear. What? Then I forced my eyebrows up and spaced out my words. Oh my God, I'll be right there. I looked at the cheese lady and pointed accusingly at the phone, giving the universal gesture for it's not my fault. Her shoulders rounded, but she conceded to ring me up. I'm not proud of lies like this, but sometimes that's the price of self-preservation. So in that particular example, you get this, what do you get? You get a little bit of the French character because, as I talk about in the chapter, there's a sense in France that that people just like to know things, that there is, it's part of the educational system, that people are trained to learn things by heart, master great amounts of information, sometimes by heart. So my daughter would go to school and she'd come back reciting the list of the kings of France since the beginning of time, or she would have all of this information about the fertility of the soil in the Nile Delta. I don't know why she was learning these things. It's like nothing, not the kind of thing that I learned in elementary school. But so there is this sense in which the French develop a kind of love of learning, especially of detail. And I compare it to kind of stamp collecting, accumulating all these stamps of knowledge that they're putting in their album. But at the same time, everybody has their own particular take on it. And for this woman, it has to do with cheese and foods and this real mastery of information that is at the same time an expression of national character and national education, but also of personal passion. That's the kind of thing that I really warm to, I think, in Paris.
So you could safely say like almost everybody has their own little specialty that they are more than happy to share.
Yeah, more than happy is the way to put it. Yeah, sometimes you can't escape it. I give examples of that too in the book.
Yeah, I always marvel at the passion of the people who, particularly the French people who participate in our trivia events. They come armed and prepared, and they know their facts, and it's, you know, it's a lot of fun, and it's very impressive. Oh, and like it's the same thing like in Brittany. They have they're in Brittany, France. They are like the specialists of la dictée. So yeah. Who can, you know, they have like dictée clubs of who can you know, best reproduce the perfectly grammatically correct passages.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, in the book, I also make the comparison between two painting styles. So one is Seurat, right? So at Chicago at the Art Institute, there's this great Seurat on the Grande Jatte. And it's a pointillist painting that is composed of thousands of tiny little dots of color. Mm. And I think, okay, that's a perfect representation of French education. It's like, you need to master these millions of dots. And Americans are more like Monet. These like big watery things where you sort of get the gist of it. And it's like, yeah, I sort of see what that is. Yeah, and I guess like in Brittany, the millions of dots would be accents and agreements and everything for the dictée. Yeah.
So yeah. So I'm really kind of curious. I'm a member of my condo association. And then, so I was intrigued when I saw that you joined the board of your condo association in Paris. And I can only imagine, you know, like all the information that you need to process and all the, you know, issues and, you know, personalities. And so what was that process like for you? And can you compare like what it would be like in the United States or in France?
Yeah, well, another great question. I mean, I think so the condo association was a bit of an odd story. And I'm not sure if this happens very often in the US, but so I was part of a coup that took place, that there was a condo association the board had been in place for quite some time and they hadn't really been doing anything. So somebody else in the building decided it was time to overturn them. And so because I happened to sort of vote for the overturning, I was lumped in with the rebels, and suddenly I found myself elected to this position, which is like, should be a great lesson. Be careful about sticking your neck out, because somebody's going to take hold of your collar and drag you in. So I found myself a member of the board. And I have to say, I have no regrets, because as much as it's a pain in the backside, it's also just fascinating, because being on the board means that you can crack this whole building open a little bit like a dollhouse, and you suddenly find out everything that's going on, which is very hard to find out in France generally. So part of it has to do just the way that, I don't know, interpersonal relationships work in France, that people tend to be a little bit more distant. It's harder to make connections. So the famous thing in France is to say that it's hard to make friendships because the social circles are smaller. But once you get pulled into one, then you can't get out. Right? It's hard to get into that relationship, but then you can never get out of it. But it's also true in a building where people live in the same building for years and years and years. They don't know their neighbors' names. They sometimes like greet them with a begrudging bonjour or something on the in the stairwell, and that's about it. So it's really hard to get a sense of what is happening in a building. So joining the board, like, first of all, brought me together with a group of 5 other people, a tight-knit group, as we like battled our way through the various challenges of the building. But it also revealed all sorts of wonderful little mysteries that were going on, and some of which I talk about in the building, as people were making midnight requisitions of communal property in the building. The crazy Dame du Cinquième with her little dog trotting around, leaving treats for us in the hallways, things like that. So I found that to be really quite revealing. I will say that, so I'm in a condo association in St. Paul. I'm not on the board, but it's a very different experience. As I say, in French buildings, often people in apartment buildings, they don't really know one another. Here in St. Paul, like, I'm moving in, by the end of the very first day, every single person, there are like 20 units, every single person had introduced himself or herself to me. I knew all of their names, and I knew the names of their dogs. It's kind of crazy.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, so we've covered a lot of ground already, and it's all very, very interesting. And I think about Paris, and just like anywhere else, things are kind of evolving, they're changing, people come in with new ideas, maybe a lot of immigration. So are you noticing, I know you're about to go back now for the first time in a while, so I'm sure you're looking forward to that. Yeah. But just in general, are you, what's your take on how Paris is evolving, or maybe your neighborhood is evolving recently?
Yeah, so I mean, there's the short term and the longer term. In the short term, I've just been hearing distressing things from friends about how much Paris has changed during COVID. And lots of shops that have shut down. I mean, many of them are short-term closures, but some of them are gone for good. So various shops, small restaurants, many of these operations in Paris are small operations, right? It's not like giant chains of restaurants rippling across the city. They're individual mom and pop enterprises, and they don't have a big margin. And once they're gone for good. One of the biggest things, I mean, just sort of hit me in the solar plexus, is the Guidebook bookstore on the left bank. Famous, massive bookstore where both new and used books for general public, for students, for everybody. And it just closed definitively. The definitive closing just happened. It's right across from Notre Dame Cathedral, which is on the island. And in a sense, I feel like these are two great libraries that have been lost, right? So, I mean, Notre Dame is being reconstructed and everything, but that was the medieval library in a sense that people could read. It was for the populace. And then with the fire, a great deal was lost. And now this massive bookstore is also lost. So it's not quite the the Library of Alexandria, but that feels like a loss, that there's that kind of change. In a grander sense, I would say there's been talk for some years of what is supposed to be Le Grand Paris, this idea that Paris itself, which is really relatively small, right? If you're just thinking about the 20 arrondissements of Paris, you can walk across that in a day, that there has to be like a more thoughtful expansion and integration of these suburbs, the banlieue, into the larger, sort of community. And that seems to be a very fraught problem. I mean, people have been trying to address this now for maybe 10 years. Each mayor comes in with a great new idea of what the Grand Paris should be like. So there's a lot of churn, I would say, right now in Paris. In my neighborhood, there is a section by the National Library that used to be very, very industrial. It's now incredibly chic, wonderful, beautiful apartments going up. And what that does, every time they build a new apartment, the prices go up, and then it pushes a certain population further out. So there is a lot of subsidized housing in Paris, but not enough. The housing crunch in Paris has been famously under famously high pressure, I think, for a long time, and there's no sense that that's going to end anytime soon. I will say, in my little neighborhood, it has been a little bit more protected from this. Part of it is because it includes the what used to be called Chinatown, the Asian quarter, and just has retained a great sort of cultural mix to it. So that I'm grateful for.
So sort of maybe a bit of a segue in there is like, how are you finding the food these days? Are you just, relish? I mean, I know you're just about to go back, but are you like relishing your local neighborhood restaurants? How are you finding that experience just when you go to eat out?
Yeah. So some people will complain these days about changes in French cuisine, and there's a little bit to complain about, that fast food continues to be a growing phenomenon in France. There is a sense that more and more small restaurants, I mean, sort of like lunch bistros and everything, are using food that is pre-prepared, and then they sort of warm it up and serve it. So that's certainly a little bit of an issue. I will say, though, that France, Paris in particular, retains this sense of being a composite of many small villages. So the open air markets are still incredibly vibrant. They're actually quite important during COVID because people are able to sell things in open air that they're not able to sell in smaller stores, though there were some limitations on the open air markets as well. The proximity with which one can find just a vast array of high quality fruits and vegetables. So I think, and man, seafood, right? You can't get seafood even on the coasts in the US. You can't find the kind of range of seafood that you get on a pretty regular basis in Paris. So there is maybe, I think, a little bit of a polarization in cuisine, that there's this kind of rise of cheap and more standardized fast food like cuisine, at the same time that there is a great value placed on this variety and high quality food. And maybe, we'll maybe see that continue to grow, the gap between those continue to grow over time.
Yeah, I can relate to the whole food variety and the seafood. I had an experience, my husband and I decided to honeymoon in Paris, and he's a big seafood lover, and he kept looking at all the array of seafood everywhere displayed in front of the restaurants. And I kept saying to him, and I wasn't really an expert. Maybe I should have let him go ahead. I was like, wait a minute. When we get to Brittany, everybody knows the fishermen. It's going to be the best, the best. But what I didn't know is that it's flown in fresh every day. You know, it's flown in fresh every day to Paris. So that seafood is really a great experience. Yeah, and then on our end, when we got to Brittany, the tide was out. So we had to go back to Paris to get our fish. It was a grand marée. It was like there was not a fisherman in sight. And so that was its own experience.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the problems, right? That you get into some small port in Brittany and you say, oh, I'd like your best. Oh, no, the best we already shipped off to Paris, but you can have the leftovers.
Yeah, there's that. And then we did find a place to eat that day because like literally no one was there, right? And they were like, well, all we have is this canned American soup and, you know, and then because it's just like a little, you know, it's a little hole in the wall sort of place. But anyway, you know, those kind of things, they actually end up, you know, being good memories, you know.
Oh,
the whole discovery process is what I think what you're trying to say in your book is like, you know, the serendipity is kind of like half the fun of it.
Oh, yeah. You know, I think that the, you know, the great problem with Paris, and I mentioned this earlier, of course, is that everybody already knows Paris before they arrive. Because they've seen it in movies, they've read about it in books, it's on TV shows, they've watched Emily in Paris, they've watched Lupin, you know, so everybody has seen Paris, they think they know Paris, they think they know what to expect. And then the danger is that when one arrives in Paris, one is trying to confirm the ideas that one already has. Right? So this is an experience that one doesn't have with any other city in the world because Paris is the one that is the most represented and that we have the most sort of baggage with. So you arrive in Paris for the very first time, you say, okay, check, there's the Eiffel Tower. It looks pretty good. You know, the Arc de Triomphe, okay, over there. It's like, I didn't really picture it quite like that, but that's okay. You go to the Louvre and you see the Mona Lisa. And you say, you know, it looked better in the book. You know, I can't get as close to it here, but you know, it's okay. So check. And what one, which is a kind of a necessary step, I think, that for people to go through. But then, as you say, Renee, when you get to the point where you can like turn yourself over to a certain amount of the unknown and let things happen to you. Paris is ultimately the city of surprises. It's a machine for generating surprise. And if you are able to give yourself over to that, it turns into a marvelous set of experiences.
Yeah, I think, and part of that is that it's so highly walkable, right?
Yeah.
So it's easy to feel like it's familiar and sort of even, I want to say cozy, maybe not cozy, but it's sort of easy to navigate. And I know people who've had the experience just, you know, with their Google Maps device, just sort of like, hey, I'll just take a right turn here, a left turn here. And that's some of their best experiences.
Yeah, it's easy to navigate, but it's also easy to get lost in, which I think is a good thing. It's a good thing, right? That instead of like frankly, in New York, it's a little hard to get lost. In downtown Chicago, it's a little hard to get lost. You just follow your grid. But in Paris, there are big avenues cutting through, but there are many twisty, turny little roads. And even for people who are, you know, native Parisians, they get into a neighborhood that they don't know so well, and they get kind of turned around. And that too leads to surprise, that you turn a corner and suddenly, boom, oh, this is where I am. You suddenly see some landmark or you happen upon a scene that you hadn't expected. And those sorts of visual surprises are part of what makes Paris a great pleasure.
So this sort of leads me to like, what advice would you have for someone who's like, you know, I would like to go spend some time in Paris, maybe even like a week or so. My French is maybe so-so. I mean, obviously they can take classes at our place, which we highly encourage, and classes are starting free trials are this week and today. But I just wanted to say, like, how would they, like, what mindset would they is best to adopt to, you know, ensure that they have like a, I don't know, an experience that is not just, you know, a prefabricated experience, but like an authentic experience, even though they may not be fully versed in the language. What advice would you give?
Right. So first, I just want to congratulate you on the skill and deftness with which you embedded that little advertisement for the language classes at the Alliance. So that's great. But so I think the best advice that I can give people is to like leave the guidebook at home one day. So there are many things. Guidebooks are very useful. They are going to tell you the hours that the museum is open. They'll sometimes like chart out some little itineraries for you. But in a sense, guidebooks also work against the production of surprise. Because what they do is they make things more predictable. You know that you'll show up at a time when the museum is open. You know that certain things are going to be located in certain places. And for at least one day, you should just set the guidebook down, go out, get a little bit lost. And often the most interesting things that happen to people are not the museum that they went to or the monument that they visited. It's the chat that they have with the waiter at a restaurant. It's getting lost and somebody helps them find their way, and you have a little interaction with people. And it's often those small interactions that are the most meaningful for folks. I sometimes suggest that it would be a good idea to get on a bus, any bus, just at random, and ride the bus to the end of the line. First of all, you get to see a lot more of Paris from the surface than you do by going into the metro, and you'll see a part of Paris that like you didn't expect because you don't know where the bus is going. It'll probably end its line in the outskirts of Paris where you would never have gone. More than likely, there will be another bus that will bring you back in, so you'll not be stuck there forever. And so that kind of thing is a way of building in a little adventure.
So that's I like your take on that. It's sort of like easy to just go the real accessible route. You don't have to be intimidated by doing something simple.
Right.
And the metros are good. And so as things open up, it's going to get to be more and more fun, and they're going to be happy to welcome us in Paris too.
Oh yeah.
And I am getting, maybe it might be time to switch to some questions from the, I'm seeing some questions from chat.
Sure.
Someone's asking, what is your neighborhood? What neighborhood? And can you like describe a little bit about it?
Yeah, so my neighborhood, I'm in the 13th arrondissement, right? And if you know how it works, so there are 20 arrondissements in Paris, and they spiral out sort of like a snail shell, starting with 1, 2, 3, 4, and then going all the way out to 20. So the higher the number, the further to the outside you are. And the 13th is on the outermost rim of the arrondissements. And I'm not even like, I'm pretty close to the rim, pretty close to the outside. And when we'd been going to France before, so for sabbaticals and I run a program in Paris on a regular basis, my wife and I would sort of install our family in the 5th arrondissement. And we like knew that place well. We had friends in that neighborhood. And so, of course, we wanted to buy in that neighborhood. And it turned out that it was just like too expensive when you were dealing with a professor's salary. So we started like looking further and further out. And then when we finally found a place, still very small, in the 13th that we could like sort of barely afford, I have to say I was initially disappointed. As I thought, oh man, this isn't like the Paris that I had imagined. But it has turned out to be the best possible thing. It is outside of the tourist hub. So there is this like cluster of arrondissements in the center where like very little changes that can be a little clotted with tourists. And so we're in an area that is a mix of residential and commercial. I've got a bakery right at the very bottom of my building. My dream is to like rig up a little pulley system so I can yo-yo down a basket and have them fill it with croissant, then I'll crank it back up. And we're close to wonderful parks. It is the kind of arrondissement, the kind of neighborhood where you find almost no tourists. If you find a tourist in that part of the 13th, it means they're lost, because there are no museums, there are no great monuments. They're just like, they're out of place. But it's a place where people live and work, and it just has this really wonderful flavor to it. So I'm quite grateful to be there. And I give more, of course, in the book about that particular neighborhood.
Yeah, I like how you go into detail about the various stories and particularly the characters. Do you and I'm just sort of wondering, do you sort of feel like you've become French in a way? To sort of
Yeah.
see?
I don't know. I think it was Samuel Johnson who said in the 18th century that those who learn foreign languages are destined never to speak any language correctly. And I think the same can be true of cultures, right? That those who end up straddling cultures, like, never quite belong to either one. You end up being a little bit in between, or you belong to both a little bit. There's a way in which spending so much time in France makes me feel a bit like a foreigner when I come back to the US, but I still feel a little out of place when I first arrive in France. And I think that that's actually a very productive kind of dissonance to have. It's good to be have a slightly outside view of things, that both be inside, but also be able to have that outside view. And that I find quite enriching.
But you sort of sometimes feel like you need to put on your little ambassador hat, no, for the local neighborhood.
Right. Yeah. So there is that. I mean, there is one chapter in the book. It's the title chapter, French Like Moi, where I talk a little bit about that, about being caught in that bind, right? So that, people will actually stop and ask for directions, and because I know the neighborhood well, I can give directions, and then it's a question of, what if it's an American or a Brit or something asking for directions, and they've struggled to put out their question in some halting French. Do I disappoint them by saying, hi, I speak English too, or do I play the game and respond to them in French? So that's the kind of situation that actually ends up leading to pretty complicated twist in that particular chapter.
Yeah, that can lead to some interesting situations, I think, when you're like, do you intervene or not when someone's in distress, or conversely, I know, do you put on your American hat or your French hat? So, but the nice thing of it is that the travel and the language allows you the flexibility to kind of expand your horizons, which I think is what you're sharing in the book with the stories, is just the kind of how it expands your universe. The more you know about other cultures and other languages. So
and I think it doesn't always expand it in the ways that I expect. And sometimes this expansion is, can be a little bit painful or a little humbling. But I think that's all for the good.
So let's see what else we got we've got some other things going on in the chat here. Someone is asking about if you're seeing a lot of Airbnb activity in your neighborhood, if that would be an option for people, or?
Yeah, not so much in my neighborhood. I mean, of course, people do it, and there are various ways of not just Airbnb, but other, short-term rental possibilities. But I would say, in a sense, we're a little bit protected, and the government within Paris, so the mayor of Paris has tried to clamp down on excessive Airbnb rentals, but generally the laws have no real teeth to them. They're very hard to enforce. I think the biggest problem is actually in the central arrondissements, the very touristy parts of the central arrondissements, where there is an awful lot of Airbnb activity, and everybody wants to be able to stay in the Marais, or everybody wants to be able to stay in the Sixth, or something like that. And this has turned into a real problem, where there are apartments being purchased by people who are never going to live there, and they're just going to rent them out for Airbnb. And suddenly it changes the character of a building, right? So suddenly your neighbors you have no permanent neighbors, or few permanent neighbors, and all you have is this constant churn of visitors. So we've not seen much of that in my neighborhood, and I'm hoping that I mean, all in favor of people being able to rent things out on a reasonable basis, but I'm hoping that they find a good balance there.
So that's, yeah, it's pretty much the same all over, but I'm glad that you were able to retain the character. So someone is asking about the French. Octavio's putting in the chat here.
Mm-hmm.
Chris is asking, I'm not seeing it actually, sorry about that. Are you able to see your chat questions?
Yeah, so I can see there was a question about, let's see, memorization. Is that the one?
Yes.
Right. So I've heard the French are world-renowned for producing mathematicians. If, say, China wants to hire a math whiz for something, they'll look to a French-trained mathematician. Boy, I have to say, that is the comment I am least qualified to respond to. I mean, yeah, there's certainly about a lot of famous French mathematicians, but I'm not sure if they're right. Are they being plucked off by other cultures? I don't know. I suppose each country has got its specialty.
And so what do you think about how does that fit in? Yeah, I guess you said like each country has its own specialty. So I think the French specialty would be joie de vivre. But aside from that, you're very competent in the sciences. And so everyone is just sort of, I'm not seeing at this point in time all the chats.
So I see. So somebody is asking if I'm near the new Center in Paris project that Jean Gong is designing for the University of Chicago. And that, I don't know. I don't know where that is. Does anybody, maybe somebody could add that into the chat if they know where that is located in Paris. But it's possible because this is in the 13th. That's one of the only, oh, it's at Bercy. Yeah, so that is in the 13th. And so that's that area that I mentioned by the National Library, where there's a lot of new construction and sometimes really quite architecturally impressive, sometimes architecturally just a little bit kooky. But that's that same general area. Although, yeah, it's the other end of the 13th. I'm about a 20-minute walk from there.
So the if you could just, if you're able to see the chat, I'm sorry to rely on you, but apparently there was like a little technical glitch on with the Wi-Fi.
Let's see. Oh, yeah. So somebody writes, did you experience the French style of writing that encourages debate? Also, their interest in debate. Yeah, debate, which, I mean, not just, not formal debates always, right? Because although there are these philosopher cafes, for example, where you could just like go to your local cafe and sometimes they have like philosophy nights and people will debate topics. This is like a very French thing. First of all, the idea that people take philosophy courses in high school, this is part of the national curriculum. You know, it's like, who's teaching philosophy in high school? So it's done like across the country. And there is just like, I would say, the spirit of debate. And so I have this frequent occurrence with students so I often run a program in Paris and from Carleton College, and students are in host families. And every single time I have some student who shows up like the very first Monday after they spend their first weekend there, they come in and say, oh, Professor Carpenter, I need to talk to you. I think I need to be moved from my family. It's like, oh, really? You know, why? What's going on? Oh, I think my host parents are getting a divorce. It's like, oh, really? You know, I don't think so. We sort of, you know, vet these families pretty thoroughly. Well, it almost always turns out that what really happened is that they sat down for a Sunday dinner and there was discussion. It's like, no, they're not getting a divorce. They are discussing. So this idea that there can be very, I don't know, sort of energetic discussions at the dinner table, and that people will speak their mind. That sometimes comes as a surprise to
That
students.
whole discussion and debate thing is like very, very French.
Right.
And that, I mean, that's healthy and that's, exciting, but if you don't know what to expect it, then you're like, what the heck's going on? I'm able to access some of my questions here now via text. So Donna asked, did you experience the French style of writing that encourages debate? And oh yeah, so we covered that with the debate. And then, so French education, I've heard the renowned for, oh, that you did that one too. Sorry about that. Are you, well, we've already done all these. So I got all the text. So there was a Wi-Fi issue on the end at
Oh, I see. Right.
work, and then I'm doing the text, but I'm getting them late. So
I'm seeing, let's see. Oh yeah, somebody comments, says, Aimee comments, philosophy and French lycées in France, driving lessons in the US high schools, right? That's the most important thing in the US. That's great. And somebody is asking if I'm part of an American expat circle. And I have to say, I'm not really that. So expats in Paris are usually, well, I mean, there are different kinds. So there's like student-aged expats, but people of a certain age, when they're expats, they're usually like executives or something that have been plopped down, and they're usually there for 2 or 3 years, and then they sort of rotate out. And that's never really been my, I don't know, sort of my vibe. So, I mean, the friends that I have in France are friends that I've had now for, some of them for 30 or 40 years, even, 40 years, I guess. So the, in a sense, I try to like steer a little bit clear of the more insular experiences where groups come together and they, little block of Americans staying together. If I stayed with them, I might have a great time, but I'd never be able to write this book. So.
I'm sure they'd love to spend time with you, all of them. As would we all. We'd all love to spend.
Yeah, wish I was there.
Yeah. So I did want to say that your book is available for sure through Seminary Co-op. I know that they have it, and they have plenty available. And then you can get them through just, regular, I know Borders, Barnes and Noble, Amazon has it. So I highly encourage everyone to buy the book. It's really it's a very, very fun read. And do we have any like pressing things that we think we just haven't quite covered that we need to say? Scott, you've covered a lot of territories, so I really, really appreciate it.
I don't know. It's sort of Paris is the inexhaustible subject, right? It's probably the city that is the most visited city in the world, right? The second most visited city by Americans after London, international cities. And it's also the city that is probably written about the most. It's the only city I know that actually has its own like video library dedicated to itself. So there's the Videothèque in Paris that keeps the collection of all of the films and TV shows and things like that have at least some view of Paris in it. So it's unlikely that in the course of an hour we'll be able to touch on everything, but we covered some of it.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate it. I think with that, it might be time to sort of wrap up. I wanted to thank you, Scott, and to thank everyone for coming today. I did mention our free trial class is happening now. Everything's on the website for events and activities. There is a book group called The Making of Paris by Russell Kelly, and part 2 is taking place this Thursday. You don't have to have read the full book, but all the details are on the website. So people here may be interested in that as well. So with that, I wanted to say thank you and to enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks
Oh,
so much.
you know what? I think we should unmute. That's the part I forgot. Unmuting. Yeah. Thank you.
Merci, Scott.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, everyone.